So we had a great time in the factory tour with Gilbert and a very small group of people from the Western region at the Olean tour. It was amazing, and it really inspired me to do this and to be here in front of you, because for me, bringing value to my community and bringing value to my neighbors is one of the most important things that I can do. And I love the fact that we have a great product and that we can share that product with each other, with our customers. But more importantly, we can service those products and we can make them better for our customers. We can make their lives better by keeping their knives sharp. And I'm really excited to bring to you today this talk on the Service Detective. And so if you did not receive the handouts, Troy, something that you can do. This is Troy. He was my mentee for the last 2 campaigns. Troy Winkleman. Give it up for Troy. He won an All-American. I love this guy. I met him for the first time this weekend. And so we've been working together for 8 months, and I'm really proud of his results, and he's going to be my assistant up here. And so, Troy, one of the things I'd like for you to do is maybe start a piece of paper for email addresses for anybody that did not receive the handouts. You should have 3 different handouts, one of which is the ultimate set. And we're going to use this when we start being a detective and reading knives. So you're going to be drawing on this. So if you did not get this particular handout, can you make sure that anybody that didn't get the ultimate handout gets it? Now, the other 2 things... So I'm going to be moving around the room as I do that. The other things, so we're going to do this with the least amount of energy, so you can raise your hand and not be staring at him. Awesome. And so you also received an 8-page workbook. I don't have any more of those, and I don't have any more copies of my service request form. So when he's done with this, we're going to have a form going around in which you can put your email address on it, and I'll make sure that you get those. Does that sound fair? No panicking if you didn't get it. Just make sure that you're sitting next to somebody that does have that workbook, because we're going to be really breezing through some of this stuff in there, and I want to make sure you get that knowledge. Okay?
All right.
Great. So on the very front, I have my mission statement. And I put a lot of effort into this mission statement, and I'd like to go ahead and read it out loud. Okay? It's the service that exemplifies the quality customers expect from Cutco cutlery. Right? So Cutco cutlery has an outstanding reputation for factory service. We, as Vector service reps, should be providing our clients with that same level of in-home service. To do less not only degrades our products, but our company reputation as a whole. Vector service representatives represent Cutco cutlery. To our customers, we are Cutco. Every Cutco service rep should be an expert at what they do. Today, I share what I know to help others improve skills necessary to do their job at the highest level. May we provide all of our customers with the same exemplary level of service that is synonymous with Cutco cutlery and the Forever Guarantee. That is our goal tonight. So, we're going to do this in a couple of different parts. We'd like to go ahead and turn to the first page. We are going to be following this. Is there anybody, first of all, by a show of hands, who has read, who owns the service manual? Raise your hand. Who's read it?
Yes.
Who's really read it? Okay, who's read the advanced service manual, Sherlock the Cutco Detective?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just want to lay the foundation. I wrote that 4 years ago, and that's what I do on my appointments, and it's going to be a big part of what we're going to cover today. If you don't have a copy of this, I did not make copies of this because it is available on Vector Connect. You do have the does everybody have a copy of the Ultimate page?
No.
Okay, so you're going to have to take really good notes. Okay, I apologize for not having enough copies. I made 100. I'm really fired up that we ran out. I'm really glad you guys are all here. It warms my heart because it really keeps the faith that we really care about what we're doing in the field and that it's important to do it correctly and to build our skills so that we can bring more to our customers. So we have an hour, but the good news is that we have more than an hour because there's really not much going on afterwards. So by a show of hands, who would be, I'm not going to say who would be okay if we stay. Who needs to leave at 9:30? Okay, so there's 2 people in this room. Okay, so that's a good thing, and that gives us more time. And actually, we were put here in this time slot specifically so that we had extra time. So let's thank Scott Garrell for that. So, yay, Scott Garrell. Okay, so first page, trained reps equals sharp knives equals happy customers equals increased averages. I've included here a little phone approach. I'll go ahead and role play it for you. And you have it in your notes. This is great. I do this on the phone. I'll actually do this at shows with customers when I sign them up, because our goal is to get everybody that uses the knives at the appointment, right? And there's a couple of reasons why, right? Here's the main reason why. So Mrs. Jones, my job is to sharpen your knives, but our goal is to keep your knives as sharp as possible, as long as possible. I'm going to give you lots of tips for long-term efficiency. The appointment will be educational. That's why it's important that everyone who uses your knives be present at the service call, even the kids. Besides Mrs. Jones, it's the person who, grabs just any old knife that really needs to be there, right?
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, so when Mrs. Jones, when I'm scheduling an appointment, I'm always going to say, hey, are you the primary user of these knives? And if she says yes, I'll be like, is there anybody else in the anybody else in the house that uses them? And you know what she says, oh no, I really use them the most. And I'm like, so your husband ever helps you prep cook? Oh yeah, but he doesn't help me very often. Right? This is the approach that you use to get him to the appointment. Okay? And it is fun, right? And it's actually a lot more fun the more you know about the knives, because then you really are an expert. So the service call detective, we're going to break this up into a couple of parts. I want to lay the foundation with my own personal sales philosophy, so we're going to talk about that. I had a couple people ask me about how to age knives properly, and I will help you out a little bit with that as well. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. Talk about advanced sharpening skills, right? You guys are here to learn how to sharpen knives. So we're going to talk about straight edge knives. We're going to talk about how they wear and things to look for, what we can handle in the field and what we can't. We're going to talk about the same things with double D edges. Then we're going to learn how to use the different sharpeners, right? I've got the Ed Reed sharpener, the number 80 sharpener, and the number 82 sharpener here. And so we'll talk about that. The company donated over $1,000 worth of knives for us to use here. And I'm glad to see that we've got some sharpeners up here for us to use. That's going to be really great. That's going to be the last part, is the sharpening clinic. And there's a lot of people in this room, so we might actually have to really break it up. I only have 5 sharpeners. I have 6 sharpeners, which is great because I have 6 petite carvers, 6 petite chefs, and 6 table knives. Okay, so that'll work out really well. I'm glad I got shit. So we have 6 cutting stations. We have like 150 people. Right? And that's really fired up. Yeah. So I wonder if this is the biggest breakup, by the way.
Yes, it is.
I'm really grateful you guys are here, and I want to bring you the goods. So let's not waste too much more time here going through the outline. We're going to talk about how long knives stay sharp. I spent, recently when I went on this tour to New York, it was a company tour, so when you go on a company tour, it's like one day that you spend at the factory. But that's not the way I roll. And so whenever I take a trip like this, I always go early and I always stay late. And because I'm from an area really close to the factory, I stayed for 10 days. And I was actually able to spend a day at the factory in the return repair department. I spent an entire day in the return repair department. So when you package up a set of Cutco knives, what happens to it? Right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, because I know exactly what happens now, because I spent a whole day down there. The people are great. Also, I spent an entire day in the test kitchen with one of the engineers looking at different methods of sharpening knives. And it's really exciting, some of the things that we've learned. The techniques that I'm going to teach you today are the techniques that I learned from Ed Reed 17 years ago. And so 17 years ago, they had a test program, and they handed out 10 Spyderco sharpeners to representatives. And I was one of the ones that got them. And my customers in the Western region are the first customers to be sharpened in the West Coast. And they have the longest standing service record. And over the last 17 years, I've sharpened their knives every 3 to 5 years, no matter where I was living. And I would fly in from Alaska, or from Portland, or from wherever I was, because they were due for their service. And that's the level of service that I would like to inspire you to, no matter what you're doing in your life. And I want you to write this down. No matter what you're doing in your life, even if you use Cutco just as a stepping stone, you always have that client base. They are always your customers. You can provide a lifetime of service for the customers that you currently have. And it doesn't matter whether you stay with the company full-time or not. And that's a little bit about my history. I actually did come out of the gates really strong. My first summer I won an All-American back in 1995. I was with the company for 2 years, and then I quit. And I traveled for a couple of years. Then I came back right before college, and I sharpened all my customers' knives again. And then I quit, and I went to college full-time. And then right before I moved to Alaska, I came back again, and I drove down to California. Right before I moved to Alaska, right, I was all packed up. And I drove from Portland, Oregon, down to San Jose, California, spent 2 weeks sharpening my knives, and then drove north, bypassed Portland, Oregon, and went right to Alaska. Right, I did that in 2004. And so you can provide a level of service for your customers long term, even if this business is only a stepping stone. I hope I inspire you to do that. If you don't have the ultimate page, you're going to have to take good notes because we are going to be covering all the tools. We're going to talk about inspecting all the different parts of the things that you might find in the kitchen. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about closing. A lot of stuff to get through. It's probably going to take us 45 minutes for the meat and potatoes, and anything left over will be the sharpening clinic. It is our goal, I have tons of rope, for every single person in this room to get their hands on an every sharpener today and the number 82 sharpener. It's going to take a long time, so we might need to do it in shifts. So at the end of the meat and potatoes, we're going to have to figure out a way to maybe break this up into shifts because we simply don't have enough sharpeners. I apologize for that. But we'll figure it out. Okay? Is there anybody else that has a sharpener in this hotel that could go get it that hasn't? Okay, you can do that now, or you can do that at the end of this portion. Okay, so if you don't want to leave right now. So you have a sharpener, you don't want to leave right now? As soon as we're done with this part, then you can go. Okay? Great, thanks so much for that. So, can you hear me now? Okay, great. Awesome. So let's talk about how we can bring massive value to our customers. So, together, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, I'm number one that's really needed. So, let's talk about how we can bring massive value. I opted to keep this section blank so we can fill it out together. What does our customers expect when we show up at their door?
Quality service.
Okay, shoot them out.
Commitment.
Commitment.
Sharp knives.
Starting line right away.
You to be an expert.
For us to listen.
Professionalism.
What'd you say, Troy?
You to be an expert.
Do you think that they expect every single person that comes to their door as a service representative to be an expert?
No.
I would say that if you call somebody up on the phone to sharpen their knives, that you should be an expert, right? Absolutely. Anything else that the customer might expect?
For you to do an amazing job servicing them.
An amazing job of service.
Education on the product.
We got education, sharp knives, professionalism, quality service, sharpening, expert. What?
All the good stuff. Low pressure.
Quality service.
I heard low pressure,
And
No
fun.
pressure.
And make it fun.
and it's fun.
Yeah.
Do you think any of our customers expect us to be high pressure? Really? You've never had somebody tell you on the phone, hey, look, I don't want to buy anything, all right? I just want you to sharpen my knives.
Yeah, they all expect it.
I would venture to guess that probably a greater proportion of the customers expect you to hard sell them, don't they? Yeah. So what does that mean when we knock on their door? Are their defenses up or down? They're up, right? That's a key component to how you function with that customer. So they have high resistance. Okay, they expect pressure sales. Why do they expect pressure sales? Because most salespeople are pushy. They're pushy, right? Right. We don't want to be that way. Why? Because we are not there to sell something. We are there to service their knives. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. What does a customer need?
High quality service that's not about you, it's about them.
That was me that just spoke right there. Okay. What does the customer need? It's about them, right? It's not about you. Write that down. It's not about you. It's about them and their needs. Okay, it's about them. That's what the customer needs. They need to be all about them. All right? If they're going to give you an hour of their time and you're there to service them, it's about them. Okay? So I heard some other things that I would say that they probably need sharp knives, right? What else do they need? Guidance?
To be taught.
They need education.
Review of
Updates.
Building value.
Value.
Reiteration.
What was that?
Like reiteration, like reminder, like of the guarantee. Like
Yeah, they need you to cover the important stuff. Yeah, reminders. The guarantee.
maybe replace.
Yeah, right. They need service. Right, that is why we're there. Okay? So, did everybody get all this stuff?
Yep.
Alright, alright. We're gonna go over this. I love it. So, now, the big question is, how can we meet their needs? What can we do? If we now know what their needs are and their expectations are, right? What's our job?
We have to educate ourselves.
What's that?
We have to educate ourselves so that we can serve this.
Right. For us, we need to be educated, right? So how can we meet their needs? We need to educate ourselves. And what do we need to educate ourselves on?
Skills.
The servicing skills, sharpening skills.
What recommendations need to be made based on wear and tear?
Yeah, different recommendations that we can make.
Their tendencies.
Their tendencies, right? And so that's a great way to put it. But what he's really saying is, what are the customer's habits, right? Their tendencies or habits. Do you have habits that you don't really know about? Yeah, we all do, right? Here, I'm going to give you a quick little example. My mother, okay, who has owned Cutco for probably about 10 years, I think she's had it 17 years. She's been at Cutco for about 14 years. I was in the business for about 3 years before she bought any knives for me. And I didn't sell any Cutco to anybody in my family for like 2 years. In fact, I don't think I did a demo for anybody that I knew for like 2 years in the business. I started with people I didn't know. I got my first lead in a restaurant by giving somebody a table knife who ordered a steak. And that's on day 5 of my fast start. That's how I got started in the business. Educating ourselves, sharpening our skills, recommendations, creating habits. So my mother, I went over to her house when she was in Florida, and she had this big nick in her knife. And I'm like, how did you get this nick? She's like, I don't know. And then we were cooking food in her kitchen, and she took her paring knife, and on the side of the bowl, it had like a little bit of something stuck on it. She just went like that on the side of the bowl. And I'm like, look I'm right here. The Cutco lady's right here in your kitchen. You don't do that when I'm here. She's like, what did I do? What did I do? And then you know what? I started being aware of that, and you know what I found? I caught myself doing in my kitchen? I caught myself tapping my paring knife on the side of the bowl. People have habits they have no idea that they have. So as a Cutco detective, what you can do is start recognizing some of these habits so you can help them with their habits so that you can change them for them so their knives stay sharper longer. Okay? So meeting their needs, meeting their expectations. If their expectations are that you're going to be a pushy salesperson, what do you need to be? Absolutely no threat to them whatsoever. Okay? Low pressure. Your job, if you are going to be a service representative, your job is to sharpen the customer's knives. And I've had people say to me on the phone, you know, I really don't want to buy anything. I really don't even want you to bring anything into my house. If you're coming over here to sell me something, I don't want you to come over. I said, so what you're saying to me, Mrs. Jones, is that you want me to leave all of my stuff in the car? You don't want me to bring my book in? You don't want any recommendations? All you want me to do is bring in my sharpener and then leave. Is that correct? She says, if that's what I want. I said, okay. I won't even bring my kit in your house. My job is to sharpen your knives. It's really important to me that your knives stay sharp. And I showed up at her house, and this is what I walked in with. I walked in with my sharpener, and I got my little number 80 sharpener, and I got my cutting board, and I came in with this because I always bring my little thing with the guarantee on it. And I walked in her house with all this stuff. And she's like, that's all you brought? And I said, you know what? I said, you didn't want to buy anything today, so I'm actually not even going to let you look. Because it's really important to me that your needs are met and your needs are for your knives to be sharpened. So you're not allowed to buy Cutco today. Okay? And she's like, all right. And so we got all done, and I said, you know, there are a few things that I'd like to recommend, but we'll have to wait for the next time because it seems to me like you really didn't want to look through the catalog. She's like, you know what, I really think you should make those recommendations. I said, do you want me to go get my stuff? She's like, yeah. It was a $1,000 order. Meet them where they're at. It's not about you. Okay? Okay. So we're going to start out with straight edges. Can everybody in the room hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I love having a big mouth. So, thanks Evelyn, I heard that for everyone. Okay, so what we're going to talk about right now is things I talk about with my customers on my appointments. I've been doing this for 17 years on appointments. It's valuable whether you do a service call, that's okay, or whether you do a demo. I used to do this on demos all the time. I want to explain the difference between a wedge and the concave grind. Who here has done this on appointments before? Just a few people. This is excellent, okay? A wedge is what you would see in somebody's home that has Hinkles or Wusthof or Schun. It's when the blade is you know, thin like this, and it gets thicker and thicker. And then sometimes they have a bolster on the end of it. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, so this is a frontal view of that. And then the concave grind, this is what Cutco is made with, right? The concave grind, it's really thin through here, okay? So, let's talk about why these knives dull faster than these knives. Okay, and why even if you go into somebody's home and they have really good Hinkles knife or really good Schun knife or a good Wusthof knife and they really like it still, how you can explain to them how their knife isn't going to stay sharp, okay? So, the wedge, okay, and the concave grind. So, it's not the food that you cut, it's the surface that you cut on that dulls the knife. So as you go back and forth on the cutting surface, the tip wears down, so you have to sharpen it. Sharpening takes off a little bit of steel. So I'm going to go ahead and sharpen this knife on the board. I'm going to exaggerate it so you can really see what I mean. So you start off with a narrow tip, and then I'm going to sharpen it. I'm going to sharpen, 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 and I'm going to take steel off of the knife. As I take steel off of the knife, I move up the blade. And on a wedge-shaped knife, as you sharpen it, it gets thicker. Okay? You start off with a narrow tip, and then it gets really wide. And then it gets even wider. The more you sharpen these knives, Mrs. Jones, the more you have to. Because they won't hold an edge. Even if you get them reground, they won't hold their edge. Have you ever had that experience of having a knife where it seems like the more you sharpen it, the more you have to, and eventually you're sharpening it all the time? Exactly. Right? That's why Cutco uses a concave grind. It's the same principle as you use it, the tip wears down. You start off with a narrow tip. But as you sharpen it, you're actually sharpening it on both sides, and you're sharpening it like this. So as you move up the blade, you start off with that narrow tip, and you end up with that narrow tip. It holds its edge consistently. Right? So as you sharpen it, you're not getting it at the more you have to sharpen it. You're always sharpening it at the same rate. Cutco holds its edge longer than any other knife. And this is the reason why. Now that concave grind, Mrs. Jones, serves a couple of purposes, right? One is it'll hold its edge longer. Two is that it actually pushes food away from the blade. Right? Have you ever seen those cool little Santoku knives that have the holes in them? Yeah, you know what those holes are for? It's so food doesn't stick. Well, we just put the whole blade like that, all the way down the length of it. Right, so food won't stick to it. You don't want carrot congregation. Right? So, I know, that's the concave grind. Okay? I just skipped over actually all of the aging Cutco products. Do you guys care? Okay, it's all right there. Do you have any questions on it? Okay. So let's talk about the edge or the canter. This is my great artwork. All right. I don't know which knife this is supposed to be, kind of like Santoku. I don't know. So this right here is the anatomy of a straight edge knife. Okay? The anatomy of a straight edge knife. The straight edges are sharpened at 15 degrees on either side. Together it's a 30-degree angle. Okay? Now you've got a couple of components, right? You've got the canter right here, which is this sloped part at the very tiny end of the knife, right here. You guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Right, that's the edge. Okay? And then you've got that concave edge, right? and then you've got the steel. Okay? So what can happen to a straight edge knife through use? Okay? And so I like to use the analogy of fingernails, because hopefully everybody's got them. Everybody in the room has fingernails? I'm really paranoid about that one time when someone says, yeah, but I got no fingernails. Really awful, right? And so I like to use the analogy of fingernails because we all have them. And the sharpening of a straight edge knife, right? So do you ever have a little nick in your fingernail? Right? Right? If you get a little nick in your fingernail, you have two choices, right? You can either file it or you can leave it alone. Right? Well, the biting comes in later. If you get just a little nick, you usually don't start biting it right away. We're just talking about a little nick. I'll bring up biting. So you get a little nick in your fingernail, right? And you kind of play with it a little bit. And what's going to happen is you sharpen it, so you file it, or you leave it alone. Now, the nail file has two sharpeners. It has two sides to it. It's got a shaper and it's got a finisher. Which is a little nick, right? Do you need the shaper side? No, you just use a little finishing stone, right? And you can just clean it right up. Right, that little finishing stone, the number 80 handheld sharpener equals finishing stone. Okay? So, you can either file it or you can choose to leave it alone. Should you choose to leave that little nick alone, it is going to get bigger. It's going to get worse, right? Right? It's going to get worse. So now that little nick becomes a deep groove. Okay? And so now you still have two choices. All right? You can either file it or you can leave it alone. If you file it now, you need the shaper side, right? Right, you need that shaper side. Right, the Ed Reed sharpener, gray stones. Okay, you need the shaper side. So you can clean up that off, change the shape of the steel just a little bit, right? Right, and then it's fine. And then you have no problem, right? Or you can choose to leave it alone. Should you leave it alone, Mrs. Jones? What do you think is going to happen? It's going to get worse. Now you have a serious problem, right? Now the whole nail is going to get torn off. Now it's getting caught in your hair and in your clothes and in your dog. Now you got stuff hanging out of it. Now you got a serious issue, right? Now you have three choices. You can bite it off, you can clip it off, or you can tear it off, right? Either way, something's got to happen, right? Okay, now let's say you're not civilized and you're not going to clip it off. Right? You're going to tear it off or chew it off. Now, is that the proper method for doing that? Did that really fix it? Right. Are there ways that customers in their homes cannot really fix their knives by thinking they're fixing them? Yeah, for sure. Okay, so, but if you clip it off, that's the analogy for sending it back to the factory. You start from scratch. Okay, so those are the three levels of sharpness. So what are these different nicks and burrs that can occur on straight edge knives, right? So we have burrs. And the burrs are those little nicks that I was talking about. The customers that you have from now until June, which is probably when the number 82 sharpener is going to start getting shipped out, everybody should have, that has a homemaker set or anything, should have the number 80 handheld sharpener. Who in this room has a number 80 handheld sharpener? Do you bring it on appointments with you? Yes. Keep your hands raised if you do. All right, that's great. I strongly encourage you guys to get one of these. It's awesome. I'm really disappointed that they're giving away with this. I really love this little sharpener. I have the new one. I've been using it for a couple weeks. I like this one too. It's different though. So burrs, what is a burr? Burr is when the steel kind of folds over a little bit and it's getting caught on stuff. Okay, and so it's not totally smooth. That's a little burr. Now a burr can get worse, and when it gets worse, you can like fold the steel over. There's a couple ways that steel can get folded over. You whack the knife on the board. Right? So how can a burr get, so it's not the food that you're cutting, it's the surface that you cut on that dulls a knife. Right? There's three things that will dull a knife. Okay? The first thing to dull a knife, number one, the surface. The harder the surface, the more the wear. Okay, the harder the surface, the more the wear. Here's my list of no-nos, Mrs. Jones. No marble, no glass, marble, tile, Corian, granite countertops. Don't cut in your cookware. Don't cut on the roof of your car. Don't cut in your driveway. No good. All right? Just don't cut on any of that stuff, right? And you want to, wood or polypropylene is what you want to stick to. Okay, so the surface. And the second thing that dulls a knife, right, is how hard you press. Okay? So when you're pressing really hard, those people that are really heavy-handed, they're going to wear the steel down a lot faster. So how hard you press. And the third thing that's going to dull a knife is using the wrong tool for the job. see big folds in the petite carver. Okay, you go to Mrs. Jones' house. I'm going to put my Cutco detective hat on, and I see these deep folds in Mrs. Jones' knife, and I'm just going, wow. I'm like, Mrs. Jones, do you like butternut squash? I thought so. Yeah. Is this the knife you use to cut it? I thought so. Right? And I'll explain, it's not that butternut squash that's dulling your knife, Mrs. Jones. It's when you finally get through it and you go, ah! And you whack it on the board. All right? There's a tool that I can recommend that would really make a big difference for you. Okay? I'm not going to do it right away. I'm going to do that later. Okay? And so when I'm sharpening knives, I am only sharpening knives. I'm not pulling anything out of my book. During the entire sharpening process, the only thing that comes out onto the table is an explanation of the double D edge and the guarantee. Okay, that's it. Now this service call isn't designed to go through my whole service call. So I'm not doing this step by step. I'm not showing you what I do on appointments. I can do that. I can make a video of it. I can put it on YouTube. There's also a lot of my training videos on YouTube. So if you want to put this down in your notes, Cutco Mindy is the name of my whatnot. I've been Cutco Mindy for 17 years. So that's the name of my YouTube channel. Weird. So that's technology. Somebody made me do it. So nothing comes out. I don't break out any knives during the sharpening process. My job is to sharpen their knives. My job is not to sell them anything. That's the second half of the appointment if they're interested. Okay? And they are. They just don't know it yet, right? And so let's talk about, so we've got folded steel. When the steel is folded over, the hammerhead. Does anybody know what a hammerhead is? Sharp. That's a shark, yeah. A hammerhead, if I write down here, can everybody see it? Yeah. Okay. So a hammerhead is a straight edge knife that has never been sharpened. And so they use it and use it and use it and use it, right? And so there's a little voice in their head that says, knife, dull, press hard. So instead of actually sharpening their knife, they just start going, man, I don't know why this knife is so dull, right? And so they just keep using it. They're trying to force a blunt instrument through their food, right? And so they're like, and I always tell people like that, I'm like, Mrs. Jones, you can chop a tree down with a hammer. You really want to, but there's a better way to live, right? You can choose a hammerhead. So that's a hammerhead, okay? So the hammerhead, you make your appointments really fun. My customers really have a good time. So the hammerhead is when you just keep using it, using it, using it, and what ends up happening is you end up like something ridiculous like that. Or maybe they hold the knife at an angle, and so their hammerhead is going to kind of look like that. Right, and it's folded over down the length of the knife, all the way on one side, the other side, or both sides. Okay. Now the good news about the hammerhead is because they haven't attempted to sharpen their knife at all. They've just flattened the end out completely. You can almost always fix this in the home. Okay, you can almost always fix this in the home, the hammerhead. Okay, it's when they actually try to sharpen their knife with some ridiculous method that is usually when knives have to go back to the factory. Most people ruin their knives through the sharpening process. Most people ruin their knives through the sharpening process. Sharpening knives is not easy, actually. And this is an analogy I used with Jim Stitt. All right, I said, I live in Alaska and I'm dealing with all these Alaskan guys that live off the land, and they go out and it's like they go hunting. They don't get 1 or 2 moose. They'll get 20 moose in a moose camp, and they have and moose are 1,200 pounds. So they have these massive animals. They'll go out and I hear guys say, oh, I got 12 caribou this year and 4 black bear, and I'm like, wow. People decorate their home with dead animals. Seriously, everybody has dead animals decorating their home, myself included. Dead animals decorating my home. It's the way of life up there, right? So if these guys are ruining their knives through the sharpening process, what makes us think that their neighbor's daughter or son can fix them without any training? Right? And so that's the whole concept of why you guys are here, right? We want to be able to fix their knives, be better than they are at the sharpening process, because we already know that they don't know what they're doing and that they're going to ruin them. Okay? And so that's a lot of times what happens in the house when we get there is their knives are already ruined. Pitting down the length of deep grooves. A deep groove is a burr that got left alone. Okay, that's what a deep groove is a burr that got left alone that didn't get any sharpening on it. and it just got worse and worse and worse and worse, and it's super deep. You guys know what I'm talking about? You've seen those like super deep burrs on knives? Yeah. Pitting down the length of the knife. Has anybody ever been into somebody's home where their straight edge knife almost looks serrated? Yeah. Do you have any idea how that happens?
No block.
I'm going to teach you how that happens right now. My girlfriend calls me up one day. She bought a set of knives for me. She had it for like a year and a half. She calls me up and she's like, you know, Mindy, every time I sharpen my knives, it seems like they're getting duller. And I said, but you have the number 80 handheld sharpener. She goes, I know. I don't know what's going on. And I said, well, I'll come over for dinner. Right? And so I show up at her house. I brought a bottle of wine because I figured we were going to need it. Right? And so I go over to her house and I just said, show me what you do. Now, at this point, I looked at her knife and I had seen that before. It was pitted all the way down the length of her knife. Right? I knew what her cutting board was. She'd only had them for a short period of time. Do you know what she did? She goes, I don't know why it's not getting sharp. So when you see the pitting down the length of the knife, ask the customer to show you how they sharpen their knives. Okay? Write that down. When you see pitting down the length of your knife, it will be so much more powerful for you to experience this yourself. That is what's happening. And now every time I see pitting, I said, who does the sharpening? Have you ever tried the 80 sharpener? Yeah, it doesn't really work very well. Can you show me what you do? And then teach them. Don't make them feel like a dumbass. Okay? And this is fine because, you know, I'm working up in Alaska. Is anybody offended if I swear every once in a while? No. Okay. You are offended, seriously? Oh, okay. You don't want to offend people, right? You don't want them to make them feel stupid, especially, and I don't mean to say this in sexist in any way, but as a woman, it has been, when I first started doing service up in Alaska, it was a challenge to win these guys over. I needed to know my stuff. If they had even an ounce of doubt, I would not be as successful as I am. I had to know everything about sharpening a knife. I had to be able to look at their knives and tell them exactly what was going on. Otherwise, I am not an expert. They're going to break holes in my theories and not listen to anything that I say. You have to ease them around to your side gently. All right, here's a good way to do this. Okay, I'll give you an example of when somebody has my least favorite thing in the entire world, and I actually am trying to eradicate these from people's homes, and that is the sharpening steel. I'm using a slicer. We all know this is a slicer, but right now it's a sharpening steel. It's one of those rods that people use, right? And they're like, right? And you know what I say to people when they break up? They're like, oh, I sharpen my knives. You don't need to touch my straight edges. I do great with the straight edge. And I look at it, and if you guys ever notice what it looks like, I'll put it up here. It's gonna be like rounded on one side and have like this crazy little thing, right? And so, does it look like this anymore? No, it's like rounded and then like crazy, okay? Now, I can't say, Mr. Jones, your knife is rounded and crazy, okay? So I have to gingerly bring them around to that realization on their own. So, and I do that through education, right? And I do this with people's knives in their kitchen. I say, you know what, Mr. Jones, check this out. I think you'll really appreciate this. So I'm going to sharpen this knife on this steel, okay? And I'm going to sharpen, sharpen, sharpen. You do it pretty fast, right? Exactly, right? So, do you know what a 15-degree angle is? Right? Can you hit it on the sharpening steel every single time down the entire length of the knife with the same amount of pressure? No. Who can? No one. Right? Unless they're a professional chef. But here's the secret. I've worked in kitchens for a lot of my life, and I went to culinary school. What you don't know is when you see these chefs doing this in the kitchen, and they look really cool doing it, right? What you don't see is that every week there's somebody that comes in and regrinds a new edge on their knives. Okay? Alright, you don't see that part, right? So they got this deal. And so I say, Mr. Jones, what you're doing is you're transferring, write this down, you're transferring your habit onto the knife. You're changing the shape of the steel based on your personal habits in sharpening. So you start off with this beautiful edge, and then you're going to hit it harder on one side, and then you're going to do it on a different angle on another side. So what's going to happen is the more you sharpen this knife, the more you have to sharpen that knife. Can you get an edge on it? Of course, every single time. Will it hold its edge? And the answer is no. So if you go into somebody's home and they've been sharpening one of their knives with one of these steels, right? I almost always send those knives back to the factory. All right, just put a new edge on it, Mr. Jones. Why should you send it back to the factory? Because you can. It's free. Get a new edge on that knife, right? And say, now, if you still really want to sharpen with that because it's fun and you look really cool doing it, right? If you still want to do that, just keep some of your old junk knives around, and then you can still have fun with those. But I'm really going to recommend at some point that you pick up the number 8 handheld sharpener. I'm going to show you how it works. Because these sharpeners that we have give you the exact angle that you need on both sides evenly down the entire length of the blade every time. Okay? So, that's how I eradicate sharpening stills. Okay. So what we covered here is we covered straight edge knives and some of the different things that we can see on straight edge knives. Another thing actually that I'd like to bring up is if you've got a knife with folded steel, let's go back up to the folded steel. You've got a knife that's got folded steel on it, and let's say that it's right in the middle and it's like about a half an inch wide or maybe even a quarter of an inch wide. Who here has seen folded steel on a knife? Okay, now if you've got folded steel in that knife and you start sharpening that on the Ed sharpener, a very interesting thing can occur. Okay? There's something going on behind that folded over steel that you can't see until you sharpen it. So it's very common with a knife with folded steel for it actually to become worse. Okay? So when you have a knife with folded steel, just let the customer look, and it's all folded down here. It's got a complete fold down the entire length of the knife. When I shave that steel off, I'm not sure what's underneath that. There could be some really deep burrs. So I'm going to try to get an edge on this, but there's a chance it might have to go back to the factory, which is fine, because it's free. So I'm going to see if I can do my best with it, okay? Right? And that's all you can do is your best. All right? The idea is not, there's no ego in sharpening a knife. Please write that down. There is no ego in sharpening a knife. You are not their savior. You cannot do it all. There are limitations with the tools that we have. And you have to live within the confines of those limitations, and that's okay. You can get as good as you can with your limitations. Right? You can be an expert at what you do and always get better, and you can expand your own personal limitations. Right? But you cannot regrind a new edge on their knives in their kitchen unless you have a grinding stone. And up until this point, we don't have anything like that in the field. Okay? So, are there any questions on straight edge knives? Yes?
What's the difference between a hammerhead and a folded over?
Folded steel isn't just one small portion. Folded steel it might just be like a quarter of an inch. The hammerhead is down the length of the knife. Yep. And the hammerhead means that they didn't sharpen the knife for long periods of time. They had their chef knife for 10 years, and they used it until it was completely and totally dull, and then they put it in the drawer. Right? And chances are, if they've got a hammerhead, they're not using it. Okay, on a paring knife, they can get a hammerhead as well. Right? So if they have a paring knife, and it's got a hammerhead, how have they been using their paring knife? Chopping their vegetables. We can already think of some things we can recommend with that, right? Okay? So we're not recommending right now. Mrs. Jones, you're using this. So I always say, Mrs. Jones, this is your paring knife right here. Oh, I have one. Say, Mrs. Jones, this is your paring knife right here. Do you know what the nickname for the paring knife is? It's called the air knife. Do you know why? Because you're supposed to use it up in the air. And you can see them kind of like lose the color in their face. And then I say, you know, guess which percentage of people use the paring knife on a cutting board? Everybody, 100%. I use the paring knife on the cutting board sometimes, right? We all do, right? You cut a peach and then, oh, I'm not supposed to do that, right? Right? So everybody's going to use the paring knife on the board. So it's not like the Cutco police are going to come zap you, you know, if you use the knives improperly. They always laugh at that. I do that. I'm like, they're going to zap you. You know? Right? So you don't have to, you know, so if you want to use these knives outside of their jobs, that's okay. Right? But it just means you're going to have to sharpen them more often. Does that make sense, Mrs. Jones? So if you want to continue to use your paring knife on the board, that's fine with me. But you're just going to have to sharpen it more often. Do you like to sharpen knives? No, I didn't think so. So, you know, actually there's a tool that I'll recommend for that, but we'll talk about that later. Okay? Laying the foundation throughout the sharpening, but there are some recommendations that you're going to have. Right? There's some things I'll recommend, but don't worry about that now. We'll talk about that later. right? And how do you handle somebody that says, hey, can I look through your book while you're sharpening? Mrs. Jones, I'm horrible at multitasking. Can we just wait till later? There's no way I'll be able to multitask that, right? I'm just like, I'll get all over the place, I'll forget things. So if you don't mind, I'd like to get your knife sharpened first, and then we'll do that together. Are you cool with that? I'm excited you want to look through the catalog, but let's do that together, okay? Or another thing that you can say is, you know, Mrs. Jones is actually telling me a couple of things I'm going to recommend. So before we actually look through that, let me inspect the rest of your tools first. Right? So there's always ways to handle it. Don't ever pull your blue book out before. If you pull your blue book out before you're finished sharpening, you've just cut your sale in half. Right? Seriously. I mean, I don't know if that's like an actual stat, you know, but that, just don't do it. So, any other questions on strict? Did I answer your question? Great. Yes?
So if they have like a lot to sharpen, it's going to be 30 minutes of sharpening, you just go rapport and talk to them about the knife the whole time?
I'll talk about that. I'm not actually talking about what I actually do on the service calls, but if I've got a Homemaker Plus 8 set that I'm going to sharpen, I start with the table knives first and I build rapport, and then as I'm sharpening each tool, I'm talking about what it's used for, and I'm explaining different things. And I do all the double Ds first. And when I'm done with all the double Ds, then I go to the straight edges. I don't want to talk about their straight edges at all. And a lot of times they want to talk about the straight edges first. But like, oh, that's the best part, we save that for last. No, we're talking about the double Ds right now. Let's focus on one thing. Oh, I can't multitask. We're just going to talk about the double Ds right now. Oh, I'm so glad you're excited about your chef knife. I'll get to it in just a second. You know? Whatever you can do to just keep on task and to keep your pace, I would strongly encourage you to have a pattern that you do on every single service call so you make sure you cover everything. All right? And you're in charge of the service call.
I know that the new sharpener is made for people that don't sharpen their knives as much, but say you have somebody who's like loves to sharpen them, that's not going to affect their straight edge if they sharpen it more often with the new sharpener, right?
Yeah, it kind of will here. So that's actually the next section. Is there any other questions on the wear of a straight edge knife?
How do they get those nicks, like the little rainbow arcs in them?
Nicks are a normal occurrence, the same way that we get nicks in our fingernail. How do you get a nick in your fingernail? You knock it up against something through a normal occurrence, right? Running this cutting board. It's just going to get little nicks in it.
Like a crack?
A crack?
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh, I know what you're talking about, right? Something that kind of looks like this.
but a little wider. The ones I've seen are wider.
That, if you have a deep gouge, hold on a second, if you have a deep groove in the steel, most likely that happened from an injury to that knife doing something outside the realm of that knife. Okay, I have actually proven to a customer on an appointment that their children played swords. With the knife. There's just nothing else that it could have been. And then I had another lady admit to me that her children played swords with the knives. And the children were still alive, barely. But fortunately, everything is covered by the guarantee. We just won't tell the company that they were playing swords, Mrs. Jones, right? So there's a lot of things that occur to knives. If you see like a deep groove, chances are it's a burr that was left unchecked. Much like if you don't file your fingernail, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. It just keeps folding over, and eventually it can actually break off. So that it could happen through trying to cut like a butternut squash. Or maybe they were dicing up some peaches and one of the pit, there was a little bit of the pit left in it. Right, there's a lot of things that can damage knives. And just understanding how the knives do wear is going to, what this is doing is it's opening up this whole new world of looking at the blades. You guys are going to discover so much stuff now that portal has been opened. You're actually going to be looking at the blade as a detective now, and now you can start finding out what's actually happening by talking to your customers. Right, and that's how I figured all this stuff. So Mrs. Jones, so let's talk about this right here. We've got both of you guys present. You guys are the two that use these knives most of all. So there's only a couple of things that can really cause a knife to fold over like that. It can be a one-time occurrence, or it can be normal use. Right? So what I can do is we can just talk about stuff. You guys might take you like 6 months to figure it out, but if you do figure out what happened to this knife, will you call me and let me know? Right? Because what's going to happen is it's got to go back to the factory, then it comes back. Now they're going to start using it again. After your service call, they are paying attention to what they're doing. And it might take them 6 months to actually do it again. right? And then all of a sudden they get it. And their knives will stay sharper longer because of that. Do you guys get that? Do you understand? Are you guys enjoying this so far? Yeah. Okay, cool. Have you guys heard stuff like this before? No. I'm really excited to share it with you. Okay. One more question, then we're moving on to the sharpening process. Yes?
Like you say this, and pretty much everybody says this, that only it's not the food that damages your knife, it's the cutting board.
Sure.
But it can be like a pit or a bone or something like that.
Is that food? I mean, it is, but right? Is Cutco a bone saw?
No.
No. So you're right. It can be a pit and it can be a bone, and that's why I just brought up the pits, because it's actually not, you know, right. Yeah, I mean...
Would it be more appropriate to just say, like, for the most part, it's the cutting board, very rarely with the bone or something like that?
Semantics, my friend. People get this. People get this. They get that it's not their food, it's their board, right? And I think that you can try to, if you want to reword it for yourself to make yourself feel more comfortable, by all means, right? Really, if you feel that you want to make this your own, you cannot become Mindy Juliana, but you can become the best you, right? And so you can feel free to take this information and leverage it at will, providing that you're maintaining a high level of integrity at all times with it, right?
Right.
So we bring the greatest amount of value to our customers. Okay, so let's talk about the different sharpening process. We're going to be practicing this later. This is my sharpener. There are many like it, but this one is mine. All right. Okay. So now when you sharpen for a long time, the blades are going to get really bowed. I think that's when it's at its best, personally. So we have 3 different methods of sharpening here. We've got the number 80 handheld sharpener. What?
Where is the email paper that just was getting passed around? Has that been passed around? Has everyone gotten it?
Oh, we have mood lighting. Right.
Let's go.
Okay. Okay, so we've got 3 different sharpeners, and so what I'm going to ask for you guys to do... Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Good. So we've got 3 different sharpeners. The people in the back are going to have a really hard time seeing. So what I'd like to do is the people in the front don't stand. The people in the back stand. If you want to come around the side, you can. We're going to do the straight edges first, and then we're going to shift gears completely. We're going to go to the double. If you want to come up front and sit down, you can. We'll try to do this quickly. Now, as you guys are moving, I'm going to ask that you move slowly, and I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit. So, I realize in advance that this could create more questions. So, if you have a question during this process, actually, you guys can stay there for the rest of the talk if you want to. I'm always a front row on the floor kind of a girl. So, if you have questions during this process that I don't answer, remember there's a sharpening clinic at the end. So we are going to be covering this stuff in detail later. If you feel that it's a really important clarification question, ask it. But if it's a general question, if it's a specific question to like your situation, just write it down. And we'll talk about that later. I have no problem, seriously you guys, I have no problem staying in here until like midnight if you want to. I came here from Alaska, paid $1,200 for this trip, and this is why I came. Alright, I came to help people with the sharpening process, to make it better, to improve the quality of your lives, your skills, your customers' knives, and to make what we do a better process. So hopefully I'll be able to bring that value here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
The greatest praise you can give me is to take good notes and pay it forward. Okay? Really. Let's pass this on to everybody in the company. Okay? So I'm going to cover 3 different processes. We're going to start with the number 80 handheld sharpener. Well, we'll start with the Ed sharpener. And then we'll go to the number 80 sharpener, and then we'll talk about the brand new number 82. Okay, and I'll pass that around too. Is there any other 82 sharpeners in the room? Okay, so we'll pass. Everybody will get a chance to see everything later too when we break out into the sharpening clinic. Okay, I will allow my alumnus to do the rest. So, the sharpening process has two different stones. The white stones are a fine-grained ceramic. This is a finishing stone. The coarse stones, the gray stones, are coarse. They have a sand type additive to it, so it's a coarse grain. The gray stones are going to take more steel off. You use the gray stones first to take more steel off. Always finish with the white stones. Okay, does that make sense? Has anybody ever used sandpaper? All right, sandpaper has different grit. I love explaining this to my customers so they understand. So Mrs. Jones, this is going to be a 3-part sharpening. I'm going to do it with the coarse, the fine, and then the super fine. Okay, that's the number handheld sharpener. That's super fine. Okay, and so we're going to start with the coarse stone, so I take a lot off. And this knife is not super, oh it is, right. So what I'm going to do here, Mrs. Jones, you don't know who I am. I'm going to cut a thin piece of paper. Now, you cannot do this if you have an office and you have to turn in an office copy. So, or what you can do is you can, because I don't have an office, so I don't turn in an office copy, you can just sacrifice some order forms and just use this one on one appointment, this one on the next appointment, this one on the next appointment. Okay? Here's the little sales philosophy. I'm not talking about sales at all, but I take an order form out and I rip the back copy off. So they see an order form. You can even leave this on the table like that if you want to. Okay? It's down. I'm not talking sales or anything, but it's there. Okay? So, to sharpen a straight edge knife, the first thing I'm going to do, Mrs. Jones, is I'm going to cut a piece of paper. This is a benchmark cut so we can see where we're at and where we're going. Okay? I can see where it was slowing down. I can feel that there's some folds in the steel. I use my fingernail to see that there are folds in the steel down the length of the knife. Then I'm going to look at it in the light. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to see how it shimmers. And you can actually see the discoloration down the length of the blade. Okay, I can actually see where all the burrs are. And then I can show my customer, see where all the burrs are? The discoloration down the length of the blade. I'm going to clean that up for you right now, okay? Great. So this sharpener, you always have the guide so you don't hit your hand. You hold it flush to the board. You're going to have your knife perpendicular to the deck. Okay, so it's at a 90-degree angle to the sharpener. Always sharpen the entire length of the steel on both sides. You can see the steel shaving off. Always seat it properly. Pull it back with an even amount of pressure. Okay? Now, here's what's important. I want you to watch my elbow. I'm not using my wrist. I'm using my elbow. Okay, this is